May we do this for the pure motivation of leading all limitless Mother and Father, sentient beings to Buddhahood. So last time we started started a talk on the spiritual path, a sort of a generic talk, and now we'll continue and probably conclude that today. So, the next thing is what could be called common myths and errors. One error, and you see this in all other religions and all other aspects of life, where someone will form a view that a certain religion or practice is the only path that works. When I was first with Namgyal in Toronto in the 60s, I was pretty open and didn't have much in the way of rigid thinking. But when I went to Thailand and became a monk, the teaching was really that was the only thing that really worked. And so I bought into that and formed the view that Vipassana was the only path. And that no other path was necessary, and so on and so on. And then years later I had to undo that type of thinking. Whenever anybody says there's only one way of doing it in Dharma, it's quite suspect right from the beginning. So I don't want to give names and particular examples, but Namgyal Rinpoche used to give a wide variety of paths to different people. Including one lady I knew, he gave her some Christian prayers to do. And to some he gave Mahamudra, to some he gave Anapanasati, to some he taught Vipassana, to some he taught unfolding through art, and many, many different ways of doing it. So, to deal with our insecurities, we like to think we've got it right, and anybody who doesn't have it like us, they have it wrong. There's reasons why rigid views develop, and it's good every once in a while just to check yourself and see if you've bought into any. Another common myth is that the path is more or less straight, and that there's a gradual increase in happiness and a gradual increase in wisdom, and so on. In the time of the Buddha, after the Buddha attained full Buddhahood, and he was walking from Bodh Gaya, where he was enlightened, to Sarnath, where he taught the 5 travelers in what's called the first sermon. As he was walking along the path one day on the way there, he ran into a man who was a naked ascetic, a follower of a teacher, that had quite a few students, and they didn't wear any clothes, and they begged for their food and so on. And when the two of them met on the path, each going the other way, each going the opposite direction, this man was struck by the radiance of the Buddha and the peacefulness and the calm. And he said, "What happened to you?" And the Buddha told him, "I've attained." And the man said, "It may be so, it may be so," and he kept going on his way. So this is, as far as I know, or in one set of scriptures, this is the very first person to see the Buddha after awakening. And, most of the people in the time of the Buddha seemed to get enlightened pretty easily and pretty quickly. So this man continued with his teacher being a naked ascetic for some years. Then later on he gave that up and he went and saw the Buddha, took refuge, became a monk, practiced the Buddhist teachings for some years, and then he gave up being a monk, went back into worldly life, married and raised a family, and then later on he gave that up and went back and became a monk again, and by the end of his life he had attained one or more of the lower stages of awakening. He died not having attained full awakening. And his path was anything but straight, anything but consistent. And he was the first person to see the Buddha after the Buddha attained Buddhahood. When I went to Thailand, I thought that I would just stay there and keep meditating until I was enlightened. And having that view, then when it was time for me to leave, it was not easy for me to see that, because I had subscribed to this view that the path was sort of straight and narrow, and you just kept doing your meditation, and somehow miraculously it would all come together and you'd attain awakening. And had I been free of that view, it would have saved me quite a bit of suffering. Another myth or mistake is that some sort of intellectual understanding of the path is a good thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just saying if somebody wants to work out all the details of what's what and really get a good solid understanding, it's not really helpful. It might even be harmful. One needs to learn enough to practice and to awaken. And a good example is I know beings who have attained awakening by going through the 16 stages of insight, and the ones I'm thinking of had never heard of the 16 stages of insight. They didn't require any knowledge of that, because it's a natural process. One follows the other. And whether you know it's coming or not, they still follow each other in the natural order. And, I know one or two people that attained the first stage of awakening without having any idea exactly what that was and what's dropped at that stage and what isn't dropped. Intellectual understanding is very often quite overrated by Dharma practitioners. They want to be really sure that they got everything straight and so on. And it's just not that important. Having everything straight about how to practice, even that's not all that important. There's a Tibetan story that Namgyal told me about a man who went and got an empowerment and a mantra practice, and it was Chenrezig, and the mantra was Om Mani Padme Hum, and the man misunderstood it, and what he said in Tibetan was something like Om Mani Oxen Hum, and it still worked. He attained some realization. So, sincerity of effort, aspiration to awaken, these things are quite important, whether you're really all that clear and smart about exactly how it's going to come about, not so important. The next myth or error is thinking that formal practice is necessary, and the one right after that is thinking that formal practice is unnecessary. There's a Zen story where a student goes to a Zen master, becomes a monk, lives in the monastery, and for 30 years the Zen master teaches him to meditate. And then one day the student is outside in the grounds of the monastery, and he's sitting there meditating. And the Zen master comes up and says, "What are you doing?" And he's startled, and he said, "Well, I'm meditating." And the Zen master says, "What for?" And he says, "Well, to get enlightened." So the Zen master picks up a brick and starts rubbing it, and the student now is really quite one-pointed. He says, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm making a mirror." And the student said, "You can't make a mirror by polishing a brick." And the Zen master looked him in the eye and said, "You can't get enlightened by meditating." And at that moment he awoke. So the view about whether practice is necessary, there are lots of people who have awakened without practice. The view that practice is unnecessary. There have been many people who had to practice a lot, like Milarepa. This lineage is sometimes called the practice lineage. So, if you have a view about whether practice is necessary or not, it's just a view, and because it's a view, it's wrong. What's necessary for you will be what's necessary for you. And it might include a big emphasis on formal practice, and it might include a minor emphasis on formal practice, but maybe something like more mindfulness in daily life, or something like that. Views are just really not necessary. Another one that I used to come across all the time, I don't come across it so much anymore, is people think that they have to leave their home and family, and maybe even have to go to a foreign country like in Asia. And that used to be, when I was younger, that used to be such a big issue, because somebody would be married, their spouse wouldn't be all that interested, and then they would try to figure out whether they're supposed to leave or not, because that's what people did in the past. And in this day and age, it can be done. There are many in the Namgyal lineage who didn't leave home, didn't leave their family, and still awoke. And there are quite a few who did give up all these things and spend at least some time in full-time practice, or even as a monastic. Again, you can develop the view that the path is long and arduous and you need extreme amounts of discipline and so on. Hui Neng awoke just by hearing 4 lines of the Diamond Sutra. I knew an American who went to an ashram, a Hindu ashram, and he awoke within a week of being there. And he hadn't even really started any formal practice. So the path is going to be what it is. If you think it's necessarily really long and arduous and really hard, then that's just going to cause you to have times of discouragement and despondency and so on, and it just makes it harder. If it's possible to walk the path without a view to how long it is or how hard it is, that's better. Now we come to the biggest myth of all, that you can do it without a teacher. Beings do awaken without a teacher. Hui Neng did. Saint Francis of Assisi did. And many, many other people. But the vast, vast, vast majority need a teacher. And in a way, the path is a little bit the opposite of your intuition. Your intuition and the skandhas are looking for things that are comfortable and fun, and the path might take you out of your comfort. For me, the great comfort was having seen Namdak Rinpoche in the early days and saw how he lived and what life was like for him. And so that took the place of a teacher at times when I wasn't formally with a teacher, because that would give me the feeling that it was safe to go into the unknown, in that he was ultimately looking after me. The next one is what I call subversion. It's not talked about very much, but I did it, and I'm pretty sure tons and tons of other people did it. When I practiced meditation in Thailand for about 2 years, Vipassana, the instruction was included, don't control things, like just let whatever happens happen, and then you just practice mindfulness. And that's the proper way to do it. You know, it's not, you're not trying to create something, you're trying to be aware of what naturally arises. And unbeknownst to me, after a few months, the skandhas had turned it into a sort of a routine, so that rather than it being fresh and new every day, it was pretty much the same stuff over and over, because the skandhas didn't want to be uncomfortable. And they had found a way to sort of subvert the process, and rather than being every day being new and fresh, every day was more or less a replay of what had already happened before. And then the skandhas could relax because nothing's really going to happen. And I believe that's relatively common in Dharma, especially where somebody just does one practice. And teachers often find ways to help you with those things. So one great meditator seemed to be doing quite good in his meditation, and he did it with his eyes closed, so the teacher told him, well, now do it with your eyes open. And that gets him, that makes it new and fresh again. All of a sudden it's a new experience, and he can't just go through the motions like he might have been in the habit of doing. Another mistake is to go for enlightenment for selfish reasons, where you're going to wind up, better and better and better than other people and better than other meditators, and it's like saying, I'm going to be number one in humility. I will be more humble than anyone else. Yeah. There are subtle mistakes where someone can develop what they think is a natural approach to life, where in fact all they're doing is indulging the skandhas. Being natural is very good, genuinely natural, but if the skandhas are running it, it isn't really that helpful. Lack of urgency, I've talked about that before. The Buddha said lack of urgency is a flaw. Lack of attention to detail. Namdak Rinpoche gave me a good lesson one day. We were on Galliano Island and he had just finished a discourse, and he was walking back to his car and I was with him, and we passed a rather ordinary looking tree, and he decided to examine this tree. Okay. And I've never seen anything so thorough in my life. And then he told me that he had seen this tree in Asia, and that scientists thought it was a different species, but they were wrong. It was the same tree, and based on the detail of his examination and probably the detail of the tree he did in Asia, he was probably right. But as you notice detail, it tends to take you deeper and deeper into what's going on. And just skimming over the surface, you don't tend to go that deep. So another mistake is thinking that there's something that's not path. Many Dharma practitioners have their practice time, and then the rest of the time they live like they did before. And especially if you live in the world, you need to find some way of bringing everything onto the path. And I was quite lucky when I was, after I came back from Thailand, I read something, and I don't remember what it was, but it gave me the impression that if I treated the universe as my teacher, the universe would become my teacher. And so I started doing that. And what I discovered was that that seemed to be true, and that the universe would give me all the things that I needed to progress in a manner and a shape and a form that I could deal with. They would always take me out of my comfort zone, but not too far. And I could give you some examples, but they would be sort of time-consuming, I think. Oh yeah, one was when I was young. I was so shy that I couldn't speak or function in front of even a small group of people. So some places I worked, we had staff meetings, and if the attention came to me, I would just turn red and not be able to speak. And so when I came back from Thailand and made the universe my teacher, then at one point I went back to university and I took a summer course, and I didn't intend to say anything in the course at all. And the very first day, the instructor, because it was a summer course and the class was small, he thought we should all get to know each other, and he made everybody give their name and a little bit about them. And so it just about killed me, but I did it. And I realized that it was giving me the opportunity to get rid of this inability to speak in front of people. So in the fall, when I entered bigger classes, I made a point of asking one question in each class every day, with a view to getting comfortable with that. And after I did that for a while, then one day my physics professor asked me to stay after class, and he was the ombudsman of the university, and there was a contentious issue that needed to be decided, and he wanted me to be the chairman of this committee, and it was possible that some of the sessions would be televised, and it was certain that all of the sessions would be covered in both the student newspaper and the Edmonton Journal. And I just about panicked, but I decided to go through with it, and then after that, I never had any trouble. That was the end of it, you know. And everything the universe gave me like that, I went with it even though I really didn't want to, because it was very, very uncomfortable. And eventually all those things got dealt with. Now, one way to bring everything to the path is a teaching called the Three Excellences. The Three Excellences, before you do something, and it can be anything, may I do this for the pure motivation of leading all limitless Mother and Father sentient beings to Buddhahood. At the end, I dedicate any merit from this and from all sources and times to all beings, that each and every one without exception attain Buddhahood. And the third excellence is whatever you're doing, you try to do it well and try to do it mindfully. Whatever's in the middle between those things. And that tends to bring everything. You know, say you're going to cook lunch for yourself. Well, if you say that before and then dedicate the merit after, you cook lunch in order to eventually lead all beings to awakening. Another big mistake is people are constantly wondering where they are on the path, and with the experiences that arise in meditation or elsewhere, they really want to know what it was. In interviews I get a lot of questions, well, I was meditating, and this happened and that happened, and there were sparks of light and showers of golden rainbows, and what is it? What does it mean, And Namgyal taught me quite clearly when I first met him that things arise, you enjoy them, you like them, you're glad they happened, whatever your reaction is to it, and then you forget about it and move on. And where you are on the path, it's extremely difficult to know. It hasn't been happening lately, but a few years ago I was regularly getting people coming in saying, I think I attained the first stage of enlightenment, Did I? And everybody wants to know. And I was with Tsultsrim Rinpoche once, and I asked him, is it important to know where one is on the path? And he said, no, it's important not to know. There's just no need. That's all part of that thing of naming and trying to pin everything down so that you're in control of your walk on the path. You're trying to deal with that with samsaric strategies, and it's not appropriate, or it's not helpful. Another one. Namgyal told me this one. He said people come to him all the time, and their feeling is that their particular group of hindrances and difficulties is something new, never been seen before in the universe, and impossible to sort out. And he said every possible combination he's seen billions of times, and every possible combination of circumstances can be worked out. It's just really not that difficult. So there's no need to take a fatalistic sort of view that my defilements are so horrible that I'll never get over them. But we could have a contest and see whose are the worst. I don't know. Of course, a common mistake is to think that you have to create enlightenment. In the Diamond Sutra, Subhuti asks the Buddha, in the consummation of incomparable enlightenment, did the Buddha make no acquisition whatsoever? And the Buddha said, just so, Subhuti, I acquired not even the least thing. So what that means is that you have full Buddhahood already. You don't need to create it, you don't need to produce it, you don't need to do anything. All you need to do is drop everything that's not Buddhahood, and then that's all that's left. And there's a recycling box out there for all of your stuff that isn't Buddhahood. You can donate it.
We'll break the patio or whatever it's called. All this stuff.
So I had a section on the benefits that come from walking the path, because I originally gave this talk to a group of people who were not interested in Dharma and were not on the path. And so naturally their question would be, well, why should anyone do this? I'm happy with my dogs and my life, and why would I want to do anything more? But I don't think we need that for Dharma practitioners.
No, I don't think
They'll make you happy whether you want to be or not. Eventually you'll get to like peace. All sorts of things like that. Any questions before we finish?
I don't have any.
Okay, let's dedicate any merit from this and from all sources and times to all beings that each without exception attain the ultimate for themselves.